Hello, and thank you very much indeed for joining us for the France 24 interview. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Now, in June 2016, the UK voted to leave the European Union. And for the last 3 years and 7 months, the subject of Brexit has dominated the news right across Europe, and notably here in neighbouring France. Well, Brexit is no longer just an idea now, it is now a reality. Well, my guest today is the British Ambassador to France, Lord Edward Llewellyn. Thank you very much indeed for inviting us to the embassy.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for coming here.
Thank you. In the countdown to Brexit, I imagine that you and your team have been extremely busy. In what sort of areas have you been focusing your collective efforts?
Obviously, Brexit's been a very important part of our work and will stay an important part of our work, but I would say we've been concentrating really on British citizens. We've enormously ramped up the embassy's efforts over the last 3 years to communicate with British citizens living here in France. We don't know exactly how many because they haven't had to register, but likely a couple of 100,000 British citizens living across this country, and being in contact with them, explaining to them as the talks have progressed what the situation is and what this means for them has been a very important part of our work. We've done, I think, over 100 meetings around France. We have set up a newsletter we communicate with them through. We do monthly Facebook Lives and so on. So that's a very important part of our work. But also working on the relationship between France and Britain, taking that forward, which we've absolutely been doing in the last few years.
And just picking up on that special relationship, I think it's fair to call it, between London and Paris. How is that relationship going to be maintained post-Brexit?
It's a very strong and deep relationship. It goes back hundreds of years. But here, in 2020, we work together across the world in the field of defence. The British and French armed forces work together incredibly closely on the basis of the Lancaster House Accords that we signed 10 years ago this year. So that'll be an important moment later this year to mark that anniversary, but most importantly, to look forward to the next 10 years and how we progress with that. We've launched, since I've been ambassador here, a big programme called Les Voisins, Neighbours, which speaks to the relationship between our two countries as neighbours, all the cooperation that involves, but also the human ties, the family ties, of which there's so many, including my own family. My wife is French, but we do a lot of work to bring people together and to put an accent on those important ties. I think, relations between Britain and France are very strong, as you'd expect them to be between two countries that know each other so well, that face similar challenges in the world and are going to continue to work together in the years to come.
Of course, the EU is the world's largest trading bloc. There are about 500 million consumers within that bloc. What's being done to ensure that the UK survives economically when it's no longer a member of that club?
Well, Britain is a strong, competitive economy. France and Britain box and cocks for the title of the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world. We're a strong economy in the fields of science and innovation and so on. And that's going to remain the case. We were a strong trading economy before we joined the European Union in 1973, and we're going to stay strong in the future. Obviously, in the next period, we need to negotiate the future relationship between Britain and the European Union, including our trading relationship. That negotiation is yet to come, but it's in everybody's interest that negotiation works, that we can continue in the case of Britain and France with I think it's £88 billion worth of trade between our countries this year. It's grown 6% in the last year. This is a burgeoning trading relationship, just as it's burgeoning and blossoming in so many other areas, and I see every reason why that should continue.
Are you therefore optimistic that a favourable deal is going to be struck between the two sides?
Yeah, I am, because it's so much in everybody's interest that should happen. I see what's happening as the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship between Britain and the rest of Europe, between Britain and France. It's the beginning of a new chapter, certainly not the end of the book.
And just picking up on a point you made earlier, what specific actions do British nationals living in France need to take? What do they need to do in order to comply with the French law post-Brexit?
Well, our departure from the European Union at midnight on the 31st of January will trigger a transition period that lasts until the end of this year, until the end of 2020. And during that period, things remain as they are in terms of how British citizens live here. And indeed, under the withdrawal agreement, their rights are protected for the future. If they continue living in France, they'll be able to live their lives effectively as they do now. On your specific question, what do they need to do? They will need to apply for residency, but not in a great rush. There isn't an urgent need to do that. British citizens will need to have done it by the end of June 2021. The French will be making clear the arrangements to do that, how exactly those applications should be made. Right now, the system is not yet open, but the French will be making that clear shortly, I imagine. So no immediate rush, but if you're living here or if you're coming here between now and the end of this year and want to stay here permanently, you'll need to apply for residency.
OK, so nothing for me to worry about, and I don't need to pack my bags just yet?
Certainly not.
And there's no, therefore, corresponding concern for French nationals who are resident in the UK, around 300,000 of them in London alone?
Of course, and they make a fantastic contribution both in London and across the UK, and I want to underline that and thank them for that here on your programme. But these rights are reciprocal. So for French citizens living in the UK, and indeed for other citizens of EU member states living in the UK, they will continue to be able to live their lives effectively as they do now and into the future in perpetuity. That is the whole point of these rights that are guaranteed in the withdrawal agreement. In the case of French citizens in the UK, what they'll need to do, again, before end of June 2021, is apply for what we call settled status or pre-settled status. It's a very simple process. You can do it online. I think 2.7 million citizens of EU member states have already applied to do that. There've only been 6 refusals out of those 2.7 million. So that's what they will need to do. But again, there's no immediate hurry. I would just say that for French citizens, the number of French citizens who've actually applied is slightly lower than for other member states. So I'd urge French citizens living in the UK to start to do that now.
A lot has changed since 2016 when the UK voted to leave the EU. And a lot seems to hinge nowadays on the personality of world leaders and the balance of power, traditional allies. A lot has changed since then. Do you see a day, therefore, when Britain returns to Brussels and says, in fact, we'd like to rejoin?
This is a decision the British people have taken very clearly in a referendum. It's a decision that the result of the recent general election has effectively confirmed, with a very clear majority for the government, with a very clear mandate for the next 5 years. So, we're focusing on delivering this decision, and I want to really stress this point, that in leaving the European Union, with which Britain, frankly, has always had a somewhat ambivalent relationship, British citizens and the British government, our country, do not see that as leaving Europe. There's barely a week that goes by where, as British ambassador, I don't attend a ceremony somewhere in France commemorating all we've sacrificed together as countries in defence of freedom, in defence of liberty. Britain has always been involved in the affairs of the European continent and will absolutely continue to be so, in upholding the values that we share and we share with an ally like France.
But nevertheless, it's been 47 years since the UK was last a sort of go-it-alone nation. Are you at all apprehensive about how the UK is going to survive with this status of being an outsider from the European Union?
No, I'm really not at all. I'm very confident about the future of the United Kingdom, the future of our country in the world. Britain is a confident, capable, nation with amazingly talented people. We've forged an amazing history, and we're going to forge an amazing future. We've chosen a different path, not as a member of the European Union, but certainly as a member of the European family of nations. We're still a European country. We're still 22 miles from Calais. We're not going anywhere as a country to the other side of the world, but we're certainly going places as a country in our ambitions in the world and our future. And I think, if we were fortunate enough to come back and do this interview in 5 or 10 years' time, we'll be able to look back on a very successful period and a very successful future. But working closely with our French allies and friends and with our European allies and friends, we're not turning our back on Europe.
Are you relieved it's all over?
I'm happy that we have a clear course ahead of us. I think that's very important. We now have a very strong government with a very clear mandate that's getting stuff done.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed, Lord Llewellyn, British Ambassador to France. Thank you so much for speaking to France 24.
Thank you so much.
And that was the France 24 interview. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Do stay tuned.